One, two, three. We are ready to start. Сейчас, секунду, грузится.
Ви скажете мені, кажіть, добре?
Да, все, мы вышли в эфир. Мы можем начинать.
Good afternoon, everyone. Доброго дня усім. Welcome to Sustainable Talks by Sustainable Strategies Institute. My name is Natalia Gordichuk, and I am a co-founder and managing partner at the Sustainable Strategies Institute. At our institute, we educate and inform society and businesses about latest trends in sustainable business models and strategies. Our topic today is how consumers and retail choices today will shape the future of agribusiness and farmers in 10 years. So why do we talk about agriculture at all? If you were listening to our earlier talks, you might have noticed that we have been inviting experts from energy and fashion and other industries. Why do we talk about agriculture? Because agriculture is one of the highest emitting industries in the world, and 1/3 of all the greenhouse gases emissions comes from agriculture. Cattle and dairy alone, they emit as much greenhouse gases as the biggest countries, industrial countries like US, China, and Russia. And milk and meat are the basic sources of our proteins. Deforestation is another issue which also contributes a lot to emit agricultural emissions. And as you may have heard, such countries as Brazil, for example, they chop down forest to expand the production of soybeans to produce feed for cattle in Asian countries, for example. So we believe this topic is very, very important to raise when we talk about sustainability challenges. Our guest speaker today is Matthias Kron, President of Donalso International and General Manager at Plant Republic GmbH from Austria. And Matthias, I would like to ask you to present yourself, but I know how much you have been contributing to developing sustainable soybean supply chains and how much you work in this direction in Europe, and that you are constantly monitoring all the latest trends connected to protein diets. So please introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about your organization, about your vision and mission.
Natalia, thank you very much. And hello, everybody. Really happy to be with you. I'm from Austria, obviously, as you can hear from my dialect here. And as a young man, when I was 25, I completed my Chinese studies. You can see some Chinese calligraphy in the back here. So I studied Chinese, and then I went into business, and I went into export business. And in what kind of export business did I go? Export of milk. So I came into the dairy industry. And at some stage, I became the owner of a dairy company here. And I saw firsthand how the animals are kept, how the animals are fed, that a lot of cows actually are eating soybeans and sitting in stables. As somebody who had a background in Asia, I knew you could use soybeans directly for making soy milk. So I changed the dairy company over many years to become one of the leading companies in Europe for plant-based milk alternatives. That's my background, my business background. So changing from animal food to plant-based food, it was a really good business. The company I founded now has a turnover of about 750 million euros. So it's a really big company now. And it has also been a great journey to understand how our food choices influence not only how we feel and our health, but also how the world looks around us. Somebody very smart said, what we eat actually determines how the world looks like. And that's true. And after my business experience, I felt, or during my business experience, I felt that change was needed in the world of agriculture beyond what a company could do alone. So that's why we founded the non-profit organization Donasoja. Donasoja is at the forefront of the European protein debate about proteins, consumption and production of proteins, not only about soy, but also about all kind of other legumes and other proteins. So this issue of protein is very strongly in the DNA of our organization, and I've been working with proteins for the last 25, 30 years. I'm happy to share my experiences with you. I'm excited to talk with you and also have an interactive discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matthias. So you said that change is needed, and it leads me to the recent report I have read from United Nations. They have recently issued the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change discussion based on 14,000 works by scientists from 66 countries, the findings they were working on within the last 10 years. And they talk about the threats of climate change. And exactly as you say, they say that we urgently need to change because we only have 12 years to do something, to change something. Because if we remember about Paris Agreement in 2015, when 97 countries committed to switch to carbon-free economies by 2030, just to keep the rising of temperature within 1.5 degrees, we see that already now in 2020s, we witness this, so it's accelerating in 10 years. So according to this report, the key threats of climate change are competition for new territories, for resources, for new trade routes, due to severe droughts and erosion in current crop areas. So this is one threat. And another one is that by the end of our century, the temperature will rise by 2 degrees Celsius, which means that living and working will be next to impossible in some countries like in South Asia. And it will cause climate migrants. And we already now we can witness people from Africa and Asia. They are not only by political reasons or economic, but also because of the climate, they are moving to Europe. It will mean an increased demand and food issues in our countries. So what is your opinion about these threats according to this report?
Yes, we all know we know what you were saying. On a personal level, let's talk about also opportunities. For example, eating more healthy, eating less meat, for example, means largely eating more healthy, right? We all agree we eat too much meat, and we have increased our meat consumption by about 3 to 5 times over the last 100 years. We're not used to that. We're used to a diet with about 10% animal proteins or animal calories, actually. Yeah? That's historically, when you look at the last millions of years, human beings have eaten about 10% of the calories from animals and 90% from plants, right? And also our body is made for that. And going back to such a diet is good for us. It's better for us and it's better for the planet. And as I said before, what we eat determines how the world looks like. Imagine we cut down our meat consumption, not to 0, but just to half or 1/3. You all know that 70% of agricultural land is used for the production of animals, right? 70%. So if we just cut down a half, and that's not, that doesn't mean starvation. It doesn't even mean, eating badly. It just means having 2 or 3 steaks a week instead of daily meat, right? So it's nothing terrible, actually, and it's good for yourself. By doing that, we could free up 35% of the world's land. And then what could we do there? We could have much more sustainable agriculture, maybe organic agriculture. We can grow trees and forests. We have a lot of opportunities, basically. By cutting down meat, we can feed a higher amount of people than we can without this cutting down. So it's a win-win situation. It's good for yourself, it's good for your kids, it's good for the climate, and it makes our countryside potentially more beautiful, more diverse, and so on. It relieves the pressure, the relentless pressure to produce cheap commodities. This relentless pressure, for example, on soy, corn, wheat, is making the world ugly, and what makes the world ugly makes the world unlivable, and makes the world and produces climate change. Biodiversity, more different types of crops, better rotation, more hedges and wetlands, all of that kind of things, more forests. This makes the world beautiful for us. Makes also the world that the climate relieves climate change. Yeah. So we are actually talking about opportunities to have a better life. We shouldn't always be so negative. We should change because it's good for us. Not only for the planet, it's good for yourself. And that's actually a message we should talk more about, because it always feels terrible. Climate change is coming and we have to change. It's horrible. You know, we have to give up things that we love. Actually not. We can think differently.
Yes, I agree with you, but talking about 5 steaks a week, maybe we are talking here about developed countries, because there are countries that cannot afford even once a week. So, but there is another source I would like to refer to. According to McKinsey Institute, they say that more and more emerging economies, they can afford the welfare of these countries is increasing. So the people in developing countries, they started eating more proteins, more animal proteins, and but it's not coming from red meat. It's not comes from pigs and some chicken and eggs. And the people, because they of their lifestyles, so on the one hand they eat more proteins, but on another hand they're moving less. So the lifestyles are not healthy, and they are encountering this problem of obesity.
Yeah.
Much as countries like United States, where we have this diabetes and children obesity, a very, very acute problem. But the governments of these countries, they see that the cost to the state of the health problems is tremendous. So they're also starting to do something to increase, to motivate people to move more, do some sports. But on the diet's hand, they are also pushing this plant-based or alternative diets. So if this trend continues, goes on, we will have from these countries more increased demand for alternative foods. I know that you are working with the analytics from different analytical agencies about alternative base of protein. Mm-hmm. Could you just give us some insight, because it's a very, very interesting topic?
Yes. Yeah, it's a lot of questions. It's of course we are in a world that is extremely unjust, and many people are struggling to meet daily dietary requirements. Yeah, and it's true. For example, when you talk about very poor families all over the world, there are about 1 billion people now in this category. They have really a lack of protein. Of course, the cheapest source of protein would be beans and soybeans, for example, and other beans. As you know, feeding animals in most agricultural systems is very inefficient, right? So you have to imagine, if you build up a chicken industry, you have a factor of about 1 to 3. So you need 3 calories that you feed to the chicken in order to have 1 calorie of chicken. So building up a chicken calorie basically could feed more people by just giving people the food that chicken eat directly. And most of the food that animals eat is actually food for humans, right? And animals waste most of it. Yeah. So we're talking about an inefficient system overall. Yeah. So focusing on plant-based foods and plant-based proteins is very good business, and it's very good for the health of people in poor countries. Yeah. On a global scale, I believe we have reached or are close to peak meat. Sorry, I have to switch off my phone. Sorry for that. So we have reached the situation where we actually are already at the peak or at the global summit of meat consumption. So we think that over the next 20 years, and you will see that already in the next 5 years, meat consumption will decline on a global scale. Yeah. Of course, there are always different opinions about it, but I'm quite sure that we're close there. And even McKinsey, the source that you have quoted, is saying that meat consumption is only increasing at a very small pace anymore. It's not like in the past. So this means we have reached a certain peak. And the reason for that is, of course, on the one hand, climate change, but also it is the choice of consumers that are questioning if you can keep animals in the way we keep them, if you can slaughter animals, if you can, treat animals like that. This ethical stuff is actually at the core of the current discussion, in my opinion. When you go to a school class in Germany, in Austria, in Denmark, in France, and you talk to 18-year-olds, you will find between 25 and 50% of them are vegetarians or vegans. I can see it in my own area here. So young people are actually already beyond meat. They don't want to eat meat anymore in the same way as older people do. And the debate has changed. And this question, if animals can be treated as we treat them, if animals can be slaughtered, is actually a global ethical debates. You can compare it to the discussion about slavery. And for example, we had 2 million years, we were humans living with slaves. Everybody had slaves, it was normal. You couldn't fill the world without slaves, right? Without slaves, the world would collapse. It was not possible. Let's treat the slaves a little bit better. Human slavery, that was the slogan, right? At the end, we all know about 200 years ago, people decided we can't keep people as slaves anymore. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying people are like animals or animals are like people, and I don't say it's the same, but this debate that's going on is a little bit similar. So I expect in the next 20 to 50 years that we will have countries that outlaw meat consumption because of ethical reasons, or outlaw the killing of animals. So we will see a huge societal change in the area of animal production, in my opinion. And this is a very big story, at least as big as climate change.
Very interesting. Actually, I've never thought about it this way, that it may be pushed not as much by economic or climatic issues, but more about ethical. And if you look about Ukrainian youngsters, even my youngest, who is 8 years old, she doesn't eat meat for 2 years now. And if you look at her classmates, about 50% of her age kids, they don't eat meat. They don't want to wear leather jackets.
You see, yeah.
Yeah. So it's not only in Western Europe. So
yeah. Super. Yeah, it's the same. And I see the same in China when I talk to Chinese people. So we have a global phenomenon that people want to stop eating animal products. And this is going much faster than people think. This is totally underestimated. This is the huge global discussion, you know. In many countries, chimpanzees, for example, have already the status of persons, legal status of persons, you know. So you can see when you look at philosophical side, you can see that animals are going to be treated more like people over time and get more rights and so on. And this is, in my opinion, the biggest story, you know. And of course, eating less meat supports mitigation of climate change. And this ethical decisions that people make opens a huge opportunity for businesses. Yeah? The question we have to face is, what will the world look like if we don't have animals anymore? How is our agriculture going to look like? And is the meat coming from factories only? Yeah. What's the role of farmers in the future? What kind of crops do we need? There are huge opportunities for startup businesses, for all kind of protein business to business and business to consumer businesses. So if I was a young person today, I would go into the protein market now and work on plant-based proteins. Could be mushrooms, could be chickpeas, peas, soybeans, whatever, you know, there are many opportunities here. And in my opinion, for Ukraine as a big agriculture country, there will be huge opportunities, and you need entrepreneurs, you need people to work on that. Yeah, and Dona Soya, we are a platform to work together, to get information, to meet customers, to know trends. So we are not a business, you know, we are a platform like you. So we can work together to encourage people to grasp opportunities in the new emerging plant protein sector.
I think that for smaller businesses, maybe because they are not as huge machines, maybe it's easier to be more flexible and switch. But let's talk about big corporations. Mm-hmm. Business model is cattle farming or meat production. Mm-hmm. I would like to ask you to give some examples for our audience about big, large corporations all over the world that have by decades, maybe hundreds of years, been focusing on meat production, and now they're changing, transforming.
Yeah, I think all of the global players in meat production are investing heavily in alternatives. You know, if you are a CEO of a meat company and you don't work on alternatives to meat, you will be fired and your shareholders will kick you out. But you just have a look in the US, all where's the money going? Yeah, always interesting to look at the stock markets. In the last year or two, major investments going on into plant-based foods, major investments. And companies like GBA, the biggest meat company in the world, or Tyson, the biggest American meat company, have heavily invested in plant-based foods. just bought Vivera Group. It's a large Dutch 300 million euro company. They make tofu and plant-based things, and they just paid 23 times EBITDA to acquire the company, which is huge, you know, when you know about a company business. And Tyson is investing heavily in alternative proteins. In Germany, the big meat companies, nearly all of them are invested. I can tell you a story of a Donnersoya member. It's a medium-sized company called Rügenwalder. It's the market leader for plant-based meat alternatives in Germany. It's a family-owned business. The family has been producing sausages for 7 generations. I was in the room when the father told his son, "You are the last one who is going to deal with meat." And this company 5 years ago started to produce plant-based meat alternatives. And now they have a turnover, I think, of 120, 150 million euro on plant-based, which is already bigger than the meat turnover they built up in 7 generations. That's a medium-sized, not multinational. It's a national German company. But it took them 7 generations to reach the same turnover they reached in five years in plant-based. So I'm not talking about the gold rush here. So please don't misunderstand me. You have to be serious. It's a complicated market, but in general, I think investing in this part or starting a business based on that is very interesting. It can be very small. For example, Nadina Rüdel is a lady that was working in marketing for Donnersoya. She left Donnersoya and she started now a business, and she produces sausages and meat alternatives product for the market here in Vienna. And she sells them on the wet markets, and she has a small shop selling it there. It's a very small business, but it's also, you know, it's also working like that. So you can do it from very small to very large, and you have opportunities in this chain. Also on semi-finished, raw materials, on business to business.
So now we are talking about the shift from producing crops for feed for animals, which will have our protein sources, towards the shift to producing crops to go directly as our protein source. And what crops are we talking about? Because now we know about soybeans, that soybean protein is 99% to the animal protein, and it's mainly now grown by same for feed. And if we talk about this, first of all, my question: how do you think how do you see the proportion if this transformation happens? How many percent out of total protein soybean, let's say, soybean will switch from feed to food for human food in the nearest 10 years? And if it's not only soybeans, what other crops could be as raw materials for proteins?
Yeah, so thank you very much. It's a very relevant question. So firstly, we have to remember we need less. So if we switch from feed to food, the footprint is smaller, because the animals are wasting most of the energy we feed to them, right? Secondly, soy's role will be important, but much smaller than in animal feed. There are studies that soy will be around 25% of the total alternative market of proteins for human consumption. And the next one will probably be peas, so yellow peas. I think they grow very well in Ukraine. Yellow peas is huge, has a huge development, a lot of investment going on currently into yellow peas. And then we have already products like wheat, for example. Wheat gluten are very interesting as well. Ukraine is a big producer of wheat. So wheat gluten production is going to be a huge thing. Also other protein crops like lupins, for example, but also hemp and chickpeas, lentils, fava beans, etc. All of them will play a role in this very diverse market. And there are niches and value chains for all of them, even for things like mushrooms and algae and all kinds of things. So we will see a really strong diversification of raw material patterns. Of course, if people want to consume things directly, requirements for production standards, quality, sustainability will be higher. So again, if Ukraine wants to be part of a Western European food scene, it's necessary to think about production standards, chemical use, right? all of these questions will be very much important for consumers because you consume the food directly. It's not feed. So questions on quality will be even more important. So adopting high quality standards in production is very important. That's why we, from Donor Soya, for example, we are working already on expanding our standard from soya to other field crops to offer farmers the opportunity to enter Western European high value markets with higher standards. I think this will be very much important. And in a way, we are leaving the commodity market, right? For example, if you talk to somebody who makes proteins from, I don't know, from lentils, this is much less a commodity than when we talk about soy for exports. Yeah. So these are more niche markets. They have special requirements. They're more complicated. They're more high value, but also they require more detail in production, and they are more complicated in a way. So good and bad.
But talking about these crops as raw materials, what will be the final product? It will be like alternative meat, milk, dairy, or what is it? What products do you have in mind?
Yeah, it's if you ask my personal opinion, I think the winners are not yet clear. There are basically there are three main roads that are currently discussed. The first one is to create lab meat. Lab meat is basically you produce something that is made from stem cells. It's produced in a clean kind of reactor, you know, in the factory. And in the end, you have meat made without or with very little input from animals. Just the stem cells come from animals. This is the most expensive and complicated high-tech solution. It's very doubtful, in my opinion, that the economies will match meat in the end, or it will take a long time. And I'm also quite sure that the sustainability of this type of products and the greenhouse gas emissions will actually not be so super good, because you need to go into very clean and super clean bioreactor factories. I don't think that's a very good idea, but many people believe in it, and there's lots of investment going on in this industry now. So this is lab meat. The second one are products that imitate meat. So it's basically copies of meat that don't use animals. So good examples would be Impossible Burger or Next Level or whatever. There are many different companies now, big investment going on, and they are trying to make products that taste and look like and cook like and whatever meat, you know. So artificial meat. I don't like it very much, because I think copying things is not something a human being should do. It's a very boring job to copy things. It's better to innovate. And also, when you copy something, you will always be kind of disappointed, right? And also, when you look at history, it's very rare that revolutions copy something else, right? The car is not a copy of a horse. It's not a mechanical horse. It's something different, right? Quite different, even not a mechanical carriage. So when you look at the history, normally innovations are not copies of the past, but actually innovations are different. That's why I think the third category is going to be more successful, and that's alternatives to meat. Those things that don't look like meat, but you can eat them instead of meat. For example, traditional things like seitan, tofu, falafel, right? All these kind of things. These are traditional products, but there can be also new ones. Why can't we invent something new, right? We can invent, I don't know, some very Ukrainian stuff like beetroot burgers, whatever, with bulgur or whatever we want to make, you know. There are many different things we can do. And maybe people want to eat something that's creative and new and tastes good. And it gives you some protein, but you don't pretend to be something else, right? This is the third category, and I think there's lots of potential in this category, but we don't know yet what the future will be like.
Okay, but there are still will be people, traditional, very conservative, that who will stay with the meat. And you have some figure in mind, what the percentage could be in 20 years, 10, 20 years of the traditional meat eaters, reducers, and other categories?
Yeah, nobody knows. I can tell you the projections. For example, when you look, you mentioned McKinsey. We have projections here from Kearney, A.T. Kearney. It's a major consultancy. They estimate 60% less meat in 20 years, 2040. Right, pretty dramatic. There are also projections from Boston Consulting Group, Barclays Bank, and so on. They all show a radical increase in plant-based food in general. And as we discussed before, it's largely a generational issue. When you look at young people in Ukraine and Austria, we have a lot of vegetarians and vegans, especially in the cities. And these people are will grow up, and the children will never eat meat, right? So, for example, your daughter, if she doesn't eat meat, very likely her daughter will not eat meat ever. And then this is a huge change already, right? The girls are influencing the boys. I can see that here. I have many boys who eat meat, but then they have a girlfriend who doesn't eat it, and then they stop, right? So the women are actually driving change. It's a very female thing, in my opinion. And young people influencing older people, yeah? If your parents come to your house and you don't eat meat, they will get no meat either. And then they maybe get used to it, right? And so on. So it's very fast and dynamic situation here. I don't know where we will end up with, but my feeling is in 50 years, maybe faster, there will be much less or even no meat anymore in countries like Austria or Germany.
Yeah, but now we are talking about linear development, that, no meat consumption, no meat production. But don't forget that there are whole ecosystems around the, let's say, animal farming, because there are vets, there are antibiotics producers, feed producers.
Yeah.
It will happen because if one chain of the supply chain disappears, it will stop giving businesses to others. Mm-hmm. Are these stakeholders aware of the changes? Because I think you communicate with not only the linear stakeholders, but also with the suppliers of suppliers. Do they think about these trends? How are they thinking about transforming their business models? Let's say Bayer or other companies who produce they have large market shares in treatments for animal nutrition, let's say.
Yeah, I think most people are getting aware of it now. It's a shock. For many people are still in denial. Maybe people say, it's not going to happen. It's so terrible, I can't imagine it, and so on. But we can see many signs. For example, if you go to France, France has a lot of cooperatives. The big agriculture companies are cooperatives. One of the larger ones is Roquette. And they just sold the whole feed business and invest all the money in peas, for food. So this is a good example. But I can see it all over the chain in Europe, that smart companies are seeing, at least they want to hedge themselves. Yeah, maybe they don't believe yet what I'm telling you, but they say maybe it's going to happen. It's better that I'm also invested in some kind of value chain for food, plant-based protein food. So most companies are actually investing and working on concepts. A little bit like energy companies also have to do wind and tidal waves or solar energy, right? Or hydrogen. So I think no energy company can afford not to work on that, and it's similar in the animal business now.
It should be strategies already. We have a question here. We have we cited the Financial Times article about Russia. We have a question that Russia, since 2020, they have tripled beef exports to China and to Vietnam, and pork as well. So it means that they are seeing the trend of increasing the meat consumption in Asian countries with pork and beef. And here we are saying that the meat consumption is going to fall down. Are you aware of this, and how can you explain it to your opinion?
Yeah, I mean that this is very complicated. We also had high exports to China. This was also due because China had this swine, what was called swine flu or whatever. So the production of pigs was very low, and China had to import a lot. But now the herds are up again. The Chinese people have reached, in my opinion, the peak of their meat consumption already, because they are eating similar amounts of meat than German people. I don't think you can go much further than that. So I think in general, Chinese meat consumption is not going to go up a lot anymore, maybe a little bit. Yeah, and then of course it's a question, where does the meat come from? And these are export streams that can go that left and right. Yeah. What I can tell you is that producing meat for exports is not a very stable business overall, in my opinion. Yeah, depending very much on export flows, so it's going to be up and down. The Germans have discovered it now. In Germany now, a pig costs only €1.20 per kilo, you know. So the farmers lose money because the Chinese are buying less, for example. So it's up and down.
So by saying that Chinese now consume as much meat as Germans do, it means that in the past, in their diets, meat proteins were lacking. It was very low percentage, and now it's up to normal, or what do you mean?
They were poor. The main reason was they were poor and they couldn't afford meat. When I went to China first, it was 1991, and animal products were luxury. So people were eating mainly vegetables, and they used animal products to flavor the vegetables. You know, it's like lentils with ham or something like that. And this is the typical. In the past, we used meat to flavor to give umami. You know, umami is the fifth flavor. This is the nice flavor we like when we eat meat. So we used animal products to flavor vegetables. The same was in Ukraine. When you look at Ukrainian diets 100 years ago, I'm not an expert on it, but I'm very sure people eat much less meat than today, and they use the meat to flavor a lot of vegetable or grain dishes, basically. And now it's the opposite. Now we eat a huge steak and we have 3 beans on the left side, right? This is the change. You know, we use the veggies to decorate meat, right? But the old diet is the diet we have been built for. We are evolutionary beings. We have been built for a certain type of diet. Our bodies and our intestines and everything are built for certain food. They're not built for eating so much meat. So going back to eat like the Chinese people did in the old times is much better for you, because you consume a lot of volume. You eat vegetables, you can eat lots of the stuff, right? You don't get fat from them. There are a lot of fibers, secondary plant ingredients, vitamins, polyphenols, and all kind of health things are in there. And if you eat a heavy diet based on starches and proteins and fat, you overeat all the time because you want to eat some volume and you eat too much. So eating plants, it's very difficult to overeat, and it's good for you in general. So the difficulty is when people get rich, like the Chinese did recently, they want to eat the food that they get for a feast, for Sunday feast, every day. That's the same what we did. Yeah, we eat the food that we eat for Sunday when we have a party with family and we have a big piece of meat. That's the Sunday food. We want to eat that every day, but we are not made for that, and the world is not made for it. So
summing up your answer to the question about Russia exports of beef and pork, it was situative just to solve the issue with the American flag recently, and it's not a sustainable trend.
Yeah, you know, it can be in some countries, like when you have Argentina you have large grasslands. Yeah, basically animals belong where nothing that humans eat can grow. I would say, yeah. For example, in Austria, in the mountains, you can have cows, but nothing else grows there, right? That's a good place to have cows. If you go to Argentina, where the gauchos ride around on the horses, and you have very extensive farming, that makes maybe some sense, right? But that's a very small part of the total animal production in the world. And I'm not sure in Russia how the situation is there. But in general, there may be places which are good for having animals and also for exporting animals. I'm not saying, but most of the animals we keep and eat live in stables. They don't move. They eat things that we can eat also. And that kind of animal keeping is not sustainable and problematic. Yeah. So I'm not saying all animals are not good, but it would be better to reduce to a place where animals can live in a certain harmony with nature and consume resources that cannot be consumed by people. So the competition between food and feed must end. That's my main conclusion.
And going back to the title of our discussion today, that the consumer and retail choices will shape the future Is there a work being done by retail, who is the closest to the end user? Do they educate consumers or farmers or along the value chain? Do they, because maybe they are the stakeholders who should do all this educational work? What is it? The situation is in Austria.
My experience is that retailers are not very good in educating consumers. Some try a little bit, but mainly retailers are platforms to give the consumer what they want to have, right? They try to offer everything that the consumer wants. Smart retailers are always looking more into trends, and I can see here in Central Europe, I can see that all the retailers that I visit have more plant-based food now, and they overemphasize that. They make huge shelves for plant-based products. So this is happening. So people are investing in brands and in shelf space for plant-based food, I would say. Consumer education is mainly done by the media, by critical journalists, by, for example, when you look at animals, a lot of pressure groups, animal rights activists, Greenpeace, you know, these kind of NGOs are very active in the consumer market, publishing reports and telling people. And these campaigns have been very successful.
So this is
in general, young people have much more, let's say, their values are more, less egocentric, I would say, more altruistic values, and these people are listening to these campaigns.
Okay, thank you. We have some more questions, but before I also wanted you to develop on the trends by McKinsey again that will shape the agriculture in the future. So one of them was about emerging economies allowing more proteins. Another one says that due to climate change, the geographies of the crop production will shift. For example, to such areas as Sub-Saharan Africa, Eastern Asia, driven by low energy costs. For example, we know that China now is investing into Sub-Saharan Africa by building infrastructure for irrigation, and having this cheap solar energy will make it very lucrative business to produce, let's say, soybeans or wheat there, and then such suppliers of soybeans as Brazil, US, or even Europe and Ukraine will not be as big in terms of suppliers for China. So the geographies will shift, and so will it mean that our countries will have to switch from these big commodity crops to some cash crops? Or does it make sense to you, this trend?
Well, depends on what we talk about. If you talk about soybeans in Ukraine, you have to see what is going on in the market in Europe. Currently, the premiums for non-GMO soybeans, as you know, are very extremely high. We are talking about 200 to 300 euros. So Ukrainian farmers can make a lot of money by producing, for example, soybeans for the Western European market. It's a very good business, and it will continue. This is not just the beginning. The demand for non-GMO European, let's say also European soybeans, is going to grow. So there is not a black and white answer here. But these soybeans, many of them would go to the food industry already. You know, my calculations show that in 2030 we will have about a need of 4 to 5 million tons of soybeans for food use in Europe already, which is a lot when you talk about European production. So this is, for example, one possible market. But I think also building up chains and like hard IP chains for other legumes like fava beans and peas and chickpeas and so on is very interesting and profitable. And of course, you need a customer. You need to develop certain varieties. You need to think of the chain. So these kind of niche crops are going to be very interesting. About Africa, I'm not so sure. You know, when you look at the population, we have 1 billion Africans. African economies are developing. These people also want to eat something. So how much is really going to go to China? So as a Ukrainian, I wouldn't be very worried that nobody will need our crops anymore. But I would think that a diversification would be very important. And I know the challenges in Ukraine with very large fields, you know, under investment, sometimes under mechanization still. It's a huge challenge. But I think Ukraine can look more into higher value markets in the future. And I think there are lots of opportunities there. Of course, you need to prepare yourself, and you need to have a little bit more marketing and sales efforts than just selling commodities, which are fairly easy. But it's a good opportunity for the many smart people you have in agriculture to develop some cash crops or niche crops.
So you have mentioned that the European market is paying good premiums to, let's say, Ukrainian soybeans. And we have a question here. What is the status of premiums for producing the now soybeans for Ukrainian farmers in 2020?
Yeah, as I said before, you have to see it a little bit different. You know, in Europe, when you talk about soybeans, the most buyers will demand some kind of certification for sustainability. Yeah, and donor soy is one of the most accepted and highly recognized sustainability certifications for soybeans in Europe, recognized by everybody, by all the different regulatory bodies and associations and so on. And so in order to sell to Western Europe, non-GMO soybeans, you will need some kind of certification, and we are one of the best. So that would be my answer. And premiums are very high, between 200 and 300 euros. The question is, does the farmer in Ukraine get the money? I'm seeing that, for example, I'm seeing farm prices in Austria at the moment at 550, 570 euros, farm gate prices for soybeans, conventional, normal soybeans. Yeah. And I last week I was in Romania and I saw farmers getting only 300 euros. So there is a problem in the supply chain. Yeah. So I'm not sure what the prices in Ukraine will be, but I can just tell you the prices here are very high. And it's important to organize ourselves together to get the prices to Ukraine. That's our goal. We should, a high percentage of the price should go to Ukrainian farmers. And maybe it doesn't work yet. Then we have to think why it doesn't work. There are risks in the supply chain. In Ukraine, you have a lot of GMO contamination. You have a lot of issues in the supply chain with pesticides. So maybe the collectors are paying less to the farmers because they have to take more risks. This means we should reduce the risk by better standards and certification, for example, in the wider area. So we need to develop strategies in order to take part in these high value markets that pay a lot of money. And that's what we try to do, and we are happy to support people in that. But we are also critical. We need to see, does it work or not? And if a farmer here gets 570 and in Romania gets 300, what's wrong with the system and what can we do to change it?
So you mean that sustainability pays off, and sustainable approaches and the correct technologies, traceability?
It depends. The problem is that in a system where you have a lot, like for example in Romania, they have a lot of risks there. They also have illegal GMO cultivation, for example, in some parts of Romania. This means that people who collect soybeans have a higher risk than in Austria, where you can be sure in Austria if you collect soybeans that they're non-GMO, right? If you collect them in Romania, you have a risk that you have contamination and that you are not careful enough, and then your whole silo is contaminated. And this risk is always cost in business. Risk and cost are the same. If you have high risk, you have a high cost. And what happens is you push the farmer down, you give him less money because you have a higher risk. Yeah. And then the farmer doesn't get a good premium and the farmer is not happy. So what can we do? We can work together. For example, we can build up a supply chain. We have a silo. We have 5 or 10 farmers or 20 farmers around it, and we work together to secure our supply chain together. This reduces and takes out the risk, and then the premium will flow to the farmer. So we need to develop a system to mitigate risk and increase the profit. Yeah, so I would ask myself in Ukraine, why do we get such low prices? I don't know exactly the prices at the moment, but I can see it in other countries. If I get a low price, I must ask myself, why is the risk here so high, and what can I do to reduce it if other people get a better price than me?
Yeah, this is about education and building supply chains. Thank you. We have 2 more questions. Changes in the lifestyle that are coming with the shift to plant-based diet can get too controversial. Should the market first focus on the food chain losses rather than pushing plant diets?
I don't think it's about pushing anything. I'm not pushing anything. I'm just observing it. I'm also eating meat, by the way. I'm not a vegetarian or vegan. I'm not pushing anything. I'm here to explain you what is going on and what trends I can observe and what opportunities the trend makes. So it's not about pushing anything. Of course, the question of diet and what you eat is very controversial. People will start to fight. If a vegan enters a room and somebody's a meat eater, they can fight. That's normal. That just shows food is very emotional and very close to our heart. But it's not about pushing. So dietary change is happening. It's a fact, and people are investing in it, and it's an opportunity. And food losses, of course, are a second issue that is very important. And it's can be independently important of diet change issue. So I don't think that's a conflict there.
Yeah, this is a lot of work we have to do in our country, for example, because 1/3 is wasted during logistics, for example, or in the field. We should start from the field. And one more question: how do you assess the impact of flexitarianism on the agri industry?
Yeah, what does it mean, flexitarian? Flexitarian is just people who are a little bit more conscious of and maybe eat less meat. Yeah, it's, as I said before, it's not black and white. You know, some people say I only eat fish and I don't eat meat. Other people say I only eat chicken and I don't eat red meat. You know, some people only are vegetarians and they only eat eggs and milk and cheese, but no. So there are different choices. Some people say I only eat organic meat or whatever. So you have all kind of different people. In general, the real vegans are a small group, maybe 3 or 5%. Vegetarians make up about maybe 10% now in some countries or more. Flexitarians can be 30 to 40%. So people who say I eat consciously and I try to reduce my meat intake. And of course, this is the largest group of people. So yeah. Altogether, people who take care to try to reduce meat consumption are in some areas already 40%. So these people have an impact. And of course, again, the impact on agriculture is less meat means less feed. Less feed means less land needed for feed, means more space for things, for other things, for energy crops, for biodiversity, for whatever.
Thank you very much. You actually have summed it up because we already have just a couple of minutes to summarize our discussion. So the key takeaways from today's discussion is that the shift in diets is inevitable. The change is coming, and the businesses who want to sustain, they should look around and notice the trends. Maybe not to start changing now, but think about incorporating into their strategy changes in their business models, including sustainability into their agenda, because this is the demand from the society. And as you said, less meat is less feed, less feed is less emission, and it will make our life more beautiful. Thank you very much, Matthias, for this conversation. I think that we will have more occasions to invite you to discuss this very wide topic. Tomorrow we will have our discussion at the conference at Ukrainian Food Valley, where farmers will be live as well, so they will be asking you more questions. And I believe that this topic was very interesting and vital, and we will have more comments when we have it in recording with the Ukrainian translation, because many our listeners they speak mainly Ukrainian. So thank you very much for participating and sharing your visions and ideas.
Thank you for having me, Natalia, and everybody. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you.